Should I be worried about Baylor?
I think so. Absolutely think so. Are we got? Are we going?
Yeah, we're going. We're going.
All right. All right. Let's get into it. Well, yes, I do absolutely think that Oklahoma should be worried about Baylor. I mean, I think you look at that last game, and it was a weird game for a lot of reasons. Obviously, because Baylor, got out to such a quick lead, was able to score so quickly. Jalen Hurts made a bunch of mistakes that kind of let that happen. But also in the second half, I mean, the reality is, I don't think that Oklahoma's defense is going to shut out Baylor for another half. There's just so many things that happened in that football game that are weird, honestly. And I do look at these two teams as being really head and shoulders above the rest of the Big 12, first of all, being legit sort of top 10 programs right now in college football. And when I look at Baylor, I mean, I think that, that defense can do some things to replicate a lot of that performance. And ultimately, like, it took the biggest comeback in Oklahoma history for them to win the game. That's what it comes down to. It took the biggest comeback in Oklahoma history. And I don't think they'll get down by 25 points again, but I do think that Baylor matches up pretty well with Oklahoma's offense relative to other teams. And look, if Charlie Brewer's healthy, if Denzel Mims is healthy, I think that there's no reason why Baylor can't be very competitive in this football game.
This is my man Shehan Jeyarajah. You can follow him on the Twitters at Shehan Jeyarajah. He is college football and basketball insider at Dave Campbell Texas Football. And we're talking about Baylor and Oklahoma. Probably want to touch on Texas here in a little bit because that's ridiculous. Look, you brought up a good point about you needed a historic comeback from Oklahoma to win that game. And you say school record, and I understand that, but it's also like the biggest against a team that was that good in like 70 years, and that's just not going to happen again. I believe that. And I don't think you're going to shut out Baylor for another half of football. That said, what worries me ain't the offense. It's James Lynch and Blake Lynch. Like, they're terrifying. Because you're getting pressure with 3 men up front. You're getting home with 3 men up front against 5. That's not supposed to be a thing, Shehan. And yet, against Texas, it was a thing. And, of course, against Kansas, which has a better offense than it does defense, it was absolutely a thing. So when you look at what Oklahoma had to do to come back, and you look at how many turnovers you had to get out of Charlie Brewer and that group, where's the edge for Oklahoma? I mean, except to say that we know that we beat them. Kinda. You beat them on a fluke. You're not going to beat them on a fluke again.
Yeah, I think that the two areas where Oklahoma does have an advantage, and I think we saw obviously before, was I think that one area is in the trenches on defense. I think that Oklahoma defensive line, and obviously, you throw in Kenneth Murray in there sort of as a linebacker, I think that they're going to be able to get after Brewer. That's something that they did pretty well the last couple of weeks, or a couple of weeks ago, rather. And I think that's something that will continue. Now, Baylor's gotten Connor Galvin back since that game, and really since that moment, Baylor's offensive line has looked different. I mean, it has looked a lot further along. And even against Oklahoma early in the game, I mean, they did a good job of keeping those good defenders, Neville Gallimore and Ronnie Perkins, and obviously Kenneth Murray, out of the backfield. But I still think that it is an area where Oklahoma is more talented. The other area where I think that you obviously point to is depth, and that's something, that's the reason to me why Oklahoma has kept winning the league over and over and over again, is that a lot of teams have a good top 22, and I think that Baylor's got a good top, 30, 35. But when you talk about a top 85, there's nobody in the league, obviously, that can match what Oklahoma consistently puts out. Not Texas, not Baylor, not anybody. And I think that, when you get to game 13 of the year, that's where the depth starts to really come out. When you start having to put in a couple of backups, play some young players, I think that Oklahoma can win from that perspective. And on the field, too, I mean, I think that obviously Jalen Hurts is a really good player. CeeDee Lamb is probably the best offensive player on this field, if not the best player overall. Like, there are ways that Oklahoma can cause issues, but I also think, obviously, that Baylor can do the same.
All good points. I do want to throw one turd in the punch bowl if I can. OU doesn't know what it means, or at least I should say OU. These kids don't know what it means to lose a Big 12 championship. It's becoming old hat. It's a thing that, as an OU fan, you're expected to go and win this league. Baylor has kiddos that remember going 1-11. Right, and remember 7 wins and Vanderbilt as a peak season. Now, I'm not going to say they're in the deep water, but they're in the thin air. What's the sense of how they're going to handle this and how Matt Rhule is going to coach them through this week of just rampant emotion, man?
Yeah, I think you're right. And the two things I'd say to that is one, I think that a lot of these kids, after playing Oklahoma a couple weeks ago, they know they can beat this team. There isn't any fear. There isn't any question. They left that game being like, we were the better football team. We should have won this game. We should be 12-0 right now. And honestly, I mean, again, Oklahoma won the football game, but it's hard to argue with them that for a lot of that game, that Baylor was the better football team. And I think that sort of stuff does matter when you go and play a team the second time. And I think in general, it's hard to beat a team two times. And Oklahoma's managed to do it because they've been the better team. But I do think that when you look at sort of this run that Oklahoma's been on, Baylor's as interesting an opponent in the Big 12 title game, I think, as they've had so far, because they played TCU that first year, who was completely overmatched. And then you played Texas last year, and I think Texas was a little better, but still pretty overmatched. And I think that you look at the way that this game went earlier this season and look at the way that Baylor's played all season long, this is the most worthy opponent that Oklahoma has played since we've got the Big 12 championship game back. And you're right. They were 1-11 a few years ago. There was a lot of question about this team a few years ago, and these kids haven't been in these situations before. And actually, I think that came out in the first matchup between these two teams. But the flip side of that is I do think that this team feels like they have nothing to lose, right? I mean, they weren't supposed to win the Big 12. They weren't supposed to be in this game. They weren't supposed to be fighting for the most wins in school history. So I think that, yes, there's going to be a big moment, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how they respond to their second shot at that big moment. But, this team isn't scared, and they know. I mean, they're confident that they can go out there and win this football game.
Okay, let's not assume we're going to get a Big 12 champ. We get Baylor. Just humor. I'm saying to the audience, humor me, because it's a very pro OU audience.
Sure.
Let's say Baylor wins this. Do they get in the playoff? I mean, let's say Baylor wins this, and let's say that Georgia loses. Let's go chalk. Georgia loses. Oregon beats a Utah team, and it clears the way for whoever wins the Big 12 championship to get in. Are they going to keep Baylor out?
I think they're going to try to find a way. Now, I don't know if that happens. If Utah does end up being a 2-loss team, if obviously Georgia ends up being 3-loss at that point, I don't know. I mean, obviously, if Alabama had beaten Auburn over the weekend, then I think that it's a clear no that Baylor could not jump them.
Right.
But I think that they would certainly have a shot. Now, it would still come down, I think, to that last group. I still think that even you look at the AP Florida's still ahead of Baylor right now. There's no guarantees with this because we've seen this before, and honestly, there's so many comparisons to this 2014 season to me right now, where you're going through and you're you're 11-1, you went through your conference, you won a bunch of ranked games, and ultimately it didn't matter. There's just such that feeling of that too. But if Utah were to lose, I think Baylor would have a hard time being left out. But I mean, look, if I'm looking at this too, and you look at the ranked wins that Baylor would have versus what Utah had, it would be the comparison of way better resume with Baylor versus obviously a team that's been more consistently dominant in Utah. I don't understand how that's even a question, but obviously they feel differently. I do think that Baylor would get in, but I wouldn't put any money on it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I love to do during game days, and especially on Selection Sunday, is follow Shehan's Twitter account. You can follow him at Shehan Jeyarajah, because I feel like you're saying everything that I'm thinking, and you're getting there quicker because you're like, wait a second, Baylor beats a bad Texas team. Let's not even call them bad. Let's just say they're a mediocre Texas team, and you're gonna put them in the top 10 after that? It wasn't even Baylor's best performance of the year, and yet brands. I'm going, God. I get it. I root for a brand name team. I root for a blue blood. So I benefit from that. And I'll tell everybody, Oklahoma's not going to lose a resume battle to a non-blue blood, right? You're going to lose one to perhaps Alabama or Georgia, what have you. But Baylor, goodness me, man. I would be pulling my hair out because you don't get very many opportunities to be here. As a matter of fact, it was Bryles, and then before that, about 30 years. 30 years in between really great Baylor stretches. And now seems like you're at the start of another one. You can hang on to Matt Rhule, and it seems like you will because he got the contract extension. But do you just get mad? I mean, as a fan, not necessarily as a person that's covering the teams, but as just pissy as a guy that went to school there.
Well, my biggest thing with all of this is I just want it to make sense, right? Okay. I want to understand what do I need to do? What does this team need to do to get in? And it's just interesting because when you see these rankings, like every single week, when you see them put out, it's just almost nonsensical at times because my big thing was a couple weeks ago before the Oklahoma game, especially, like I didn't understand how Baylor could have beaten 2 ranked opponents and still not be a top 10 team, even though they were 9-0 at the time. It's stuff like that where you just feel like, what even is the criteria? What do they care about? Because it seems to have been historically that they care about wins, but then it's like, okay, but like you can be a 2-loss team ahead of a 0-loss team because you played, one other ranked team that was number 11. Like I just don't understand the logic of it. And look, I mean, brands do dominate college football, and like I think that beating Texas, whether it should or not, still means something to the committee because they remember Texas per se being, Texas. And I think that obviously that's one thing where in 2013 and 2014, the fact that Baylor had those wins over Oklahoma, even though it wasn't a great 2014 Oklahoma team. This stuff I think does matter. And look, as somebody who not only went to one of these schools, but also just loves to follow some of the smaller schools across the country, it's very frustrating because to me, it's a sign that people don't want those schools to matter, that they want it all to be about like 8 teams. And I understand, from some perspective, because like, again, you have Alabama, you have Ohio State, you have Oklahoma. Those are teams that are competitive every single year. But I think that the one thing that sucked about the playoff is that it's made everybody just talk about those teams, and not talk about some really great stories that are happening around the sport. Like, with Minnesota, like we should be talking about how incredible it is that Minnesota started 10-0, but it's all in the context of the playoffs. So that's all we care about. And that's frustrating to me. And ultimately it's like, Minnesota's a really good team that, I want to see play against another really good team at some points, but we won't really get to care about that because it's going to be all the talk about the playoffs. It's going to be all the talk about, well, they're good, but are they this good? And I think that's the biggest thing to me where, I almost would rather just say, hey, you know what, Ohio State and LSU, go play your game. And I'd rather just get to enjoy what's going on here.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that would root for that because those are the same people that say the playoff is already too big and that you have one. To which I would say, no, man, the way to get away from talking about the playoff, but also being fair to all the teams that actually put together pretty decent seasons is to expand the thing out to 16 and 24. Because while you're bringing up rightfully so Minnesota and what they've done, because my joke was the last time that Minnesota was 8-0, they claimed a national championship. Like it works that way. But also teams like Memphis, who might have played a tougher schedule than Utah. Or Appalachian State and their first-year head coach, Eli Drinkwitz, who's from Norman, who went there from NC State, and it just giving some more opportunities for SMU. My goodness, 10 wins for the first time since 84. My parents were married in 84. It's 35 years ago, and they're going to play in what? Cotton Bowl at best, but they're probably going to get kicked out of that because they didn't win a conference championship. I want more opportunities to talk about these teams in a way that we might for professional teams like the NBA and the NFL or even Major League Baseball, because in Major League Baseball, the Nationals happened. That's a wild card team. They're not even nobody would let them in this format, and yet they can go and they can win it all against good teams, like an Astros team that was historically awesome. So that's the reason why I want to explode it out as opposed to make it smaller and make it even more select, because I call these people royalists that just want LSU and Oklahoma and Alabama. Because I'm going, I don't know, man. I went to TU.
Right. Well, and one thing for me is just, I think that, and not to get too far off on a different tangent, but like one thing I think that's been interesting about the playoff is that, in all reality, there are probably about 10 teams, like maybe even total, that can truly compete for like consistent playoff appearances and national titles and that sort of stuff. And I think that actually when you have a 14 playoff, it's actually borne itself out where you feel like if you don't go to one of these schools, you're never going to ever have a shot at that. And
100%.
so, I think that, I think that in a way that's actually reduced parity across the sport because people feel like if they don't go to one of these schools, there's just no point. There's no point if you're a top recruit because you'll never get a chance to play at the very top. And, and it didn't always used to be like that. I mean, back in the day, like you could go to, obviously in the 90s, Colorado, Washington, schools like that, and you get really good players. You go to Nebraska, you go to, whatever places. And
Houston.
Houston, yeah. You won the Heisman Trophy there. And you could compete for everything, and you could be a relevant team, even if you weren't going to be the number one team in America. There's still a lot to play for. But now I think we've become so centralized talking about the playoff that it almost devalues anything that happens anywhere else. Like I was talking about a kid from Oklahoma with one of my friends, Mason Fine.
Yeah.
And, his response to Mason Fine was, well, yes, but Conference USA is so much lower. And I'm like, why do you care? Why do you care about that? Why is that the thing that you take away from this? Like, he's throwing for more yards than anybody else in college football. And, and he's, a Cherokee kid, and he's a kid at North Texas who's resurrecting a program. And, like, why do we care that, oh, well, would he have done this if he was playing against Big 12 opponents? I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
I think it's also because you and I I trained myself to do this long ago because it's a better way to consume sports, but I'm looking for good stories. I'm looking for good people.
Yeah.
I'm looking for what is different about this. Like, I think I've read this on Dave Campbell. Is it Odessa Permian? It's the first year where they actually put together something like a really awesome season. And it was a lateral back. I'm forgetting the story altogether. Maybe you can help me.
UT Permian Basin.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't care what they did. Like, I don't care what their season was. That's an awesome story. And I want to see more of that. And if they did put together a really good season, then give them more opportunity to do this. And in this sport, where I tell everybody, how dare we rank teams? How dare we vote on who gets in when the kids do this 365 days a year and they get 12 opportunities to show. And if you do what I think is the toughest thing in all of sports to do, which is go undefeated during the regular season and through a national championship, my goodness, dude, like, how are we going to keep you out of this thing because of who happened to be good on your schedule that year? But to get back on point, get back on point. What is the deciding factor for Oklahoma or Baylor as you see it going into this championship game?
Yeah, I think that the ultimate decider for Oklahoma is going to be turnovers. If Jalen Hurts continues to turn the ball over at the rate that he has the last couple of weeks, I just think it's going to be a huge issue. I think that Baylor's a team that can take advantage of that, and they almost did the first time around. Hurts has done a lot of things well this year, but I think he's also put Oklahoma in a couple bad positions at times, and they've been good enough to get out of them against every team basically, other than Kansas State. But I don't think that you can continue to do that against Baylor, against a defense as good as Baylor. You can't be sloppy with the ball. You can't just, throw a whole bunch of jump balls and hope CeeDee Lamb comes down with them. You have to take care of the ball. You have to score in the red zone. You have to be disciplined. And I think that that's something that he's struggled with basically all year long. And against Baylor, I think the second time around, I don't think it's going to fly. And on the other side for Baylor, I think that Baylor, you don't necessarily want to be a possession team. I know that they want to control the clock, but I think that they need to, find a way to diversify the offense early. They need to find a way to move the chains, get down the field. It was funny, back during that game, the Baylor-Oklahoma game earlier in the year, it almost felt like it was the Bryles offense again with how quickly they were trying to strike. And I think that you saw the flip side of the Bryles offense, obviously, which is that when you don't have the ball for very long, it puts way too much on your defense and you have to defend 95 plays. So I think they have to find a way to, and actually a better way to put that might be they have to find a way to get the defense off the field. Whether it's turnovers, whether it's 3 and outs, whether it's whatever, they have to find a way to keep their offense on the field, keep the defense fresh. Because like you mentioned, when this team plays 60, 65 defensive plays, they can get to your quarterback with 3 guys. That's incredible. Not many teams in America can do that. And with guys like James Lynch and Bravion Roy, they can do it. And if you can keep them on the sideline long enough to where they have wind at the end of the game, I think Baylor can very much win this football game.
Yeah, man. I think for Oklahoma, you're going to have to run the ball, and you're going to have to be committed to it very early. I wouldn't even start with just trying to stretch the defense, though I think that's part of Lincoln Riley's DNA, let alone his game plan. He's going to just try to test your safeties and your corners very early because he's got those athletes outside. But the thing that I take away from football is if you're a big man, it is difficult to play a lot of football because you're a big man, right? In that you don't get gas back. You don't get a second wind. You just stay tired. And when Oklahoma is playing great football, their offensive line feels as if it has just been taking apart your defensive line. So by midway through the third quarter, it's all them all the time. And if Oklahoma does keep time of possession, which is the better way to watch this stat, I think that's what's going to decide it because I want that Baylor defense on the field for a long time if I'm OU. On the flip side, you got to protect Charlie Brewer. Like that's what it is for me. If Oklahoma's defense can get home, it's a long day because as good as Charlie is out just making stuff happen, not that he's a dual threat kind of guy, but he's certainly good enough to pick him up, put him down. Every time that Oklahoma was able to hit him, or at the very least make it very difficult for him to move around, you saw good things happen in the secondary for Oklahoma. And if they're running the ball on this team, he's going to have all day because you're going to be terrified. If Denzel Mims or Tyquan Thornton or RJ are running wild and stupid, it's going to be a long day. So I'm going to watch to see who gets home and how often they get home because it could just as easily be Kenneth Murray Jr. overrunning plays, which is a thing that will happen. I think your point about Jalen Hurts and the turnover, I think we know about that too well. I make jokes about it, but because I had somebody try to rationalize fumbling the football to me by saying he carries the ball. Like I think he is at 196 attempts rushing, which is stupid. It's stupid for a quarterback, and yet they'll be like, "Hey, he puts the ball on the ground less than wishbone quarterbacks." I said, "Yo, man, you're not going to get anywhere rationalizing fumbling the football. It's just not. We're not going to."
Right, and it's become a trend. You know, that's the thing. It's like it's one thing if he's had a couple of games where he's been loose with it, and I mean. You know, having a game where you're loose with it is something that quarterbacks get criticized for, you know, but ultimately if you're putting the ball on the ground once or twice, basically every single game, that's ultimately, you know, and it might not be even through this game. It might not be this game. It could be when you get into the playoff and have to play Ohio State. Right. That's going to cost you, you know, that's really going to cost you.
And he's done that since 2016. It's not new. You know what I mean? It's not this year. It's a problem. Ball security is a thing for him. To say nothing of throwing it to the other team. Like there's still, we talk about him handling the ball, but there's even against Oklahoma State, because I'm at Boone Pickens for that game, he just lost one toward an orange jersey or black jersey, orange pants. And I'm going, what did you see? Like, why did you throw that? And that's not something I'm used to seeing out of a Lincoln Riley quarterback for sure. Before I let you get out of here, I think Matt Rhule is coach of the year. I don't think you're going to fight me on that. However, would there be something about Matt Rhule that you would watch for that perhaps gets him in trouble? Does he take over play calling or any of that sort of stuff?
I don't want to just say no. Right?
Okay.
I mean,
but if knows the answer, then knows the answer.
Right. But you know, I think that the biggest thing that you say about Matt Rhule is that you know, he's got a staff that he really trusts. You know, he never sort of meddled with Phil Snow. He never sort of meddled with Jeff Nixon. You know, he's kind of let his guys do his job, and he's been involved in the total game plan. And you know, and I think that that's one of the things that you say about that is he's not per se either an offensive or defensive guy. He's coached on both sides of the football at a high level. And I think that because of that, you know, and I mean, not to touch too much on this other guy, but you know, with Tom Herman, it's like when things go wrong on offense, it's like, it's time. I got to jump in. I got to save the day. And I don't think that Matt Rhule sort of is quite as susceptible to that just because, again, I mean, he knows his X's and O's, but he's not like an X and O's master. He's not an X and O's coach. He's not one of those guys like Lincoln Riley even, who's just like, the way that I'm going to beat you is by, you know, taking things into my own hands and being an offensive genius or a defensive genius. He's just a guy who really wants to instill the culture into his program, and he wants to be a leader, and he wants to be involved in the total team game plan, which again, I think makes Baylor a good team because I think it makes the team more complementary. But But I think that ultimately that's one credit that you give to him is I think he knows how to hire staff, and again, it helps because he's winning, but he knows how to hire staff that he trusts.
I think for Lincoln, he goes from Lincoln Riley to when we call him Lincoln F and Riley because he gets too cute with the play calls, and they they just it's like, man, just run the damn ball, man. Stop with this, because he's always got 2 or 3 in there, and sometimes they're fantastic. Like he had the Brock Heward called the Philly special, and he heard from OU fans about it because they did it first, yada yada. But no, it's that kind of stuff, and I think if those plays go well, OU wins a football game. If those plays don't go well, OU loses a football game, which is such a stupid thing to hang your hat on if you are an OU fan. But hey, that's what you get when you get Lincoln Riley. This is Shehan Jeyarajah. Follow him on the Twitters at Shehan Jeyarajah, and college football and basketball insider for Dave Campbell, Texas football. Shehan, thanks so much, man. I appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Very cool. So I'm probably going to leave it there. If you like the channel, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel because I upload a video every single day. It's always related, college football related, sports related. We have a good time. We will be back tomorrow, as I am every day, talking college football. I uploaded like 5 videos today because segment after segment after segment. This is our time. Expect this channel to be on and popping, and we're going to have a great time this December. I promise. All right. That is it for me. Deuces.